Breaking news out of the United Kingdom. And this is something every worker needs to pay attention to, because what was promised as a new beginning for the working class has now turned into one of the biggest political betrayals of recent times. Just weeks ago, the government stood in front of the public and made a bold, confident promise. A promise that was supposed to change the lives of millions of people. They said that workers would finally receive protection from day one of their job. Not after 1 year. Not after 2 years. Not after some hidden trial period. But from the very first day. For once, workers felt seen. For once, they felt protected. For once, they believed the system might actually work for them. And now, that promise is being taken away. Quietly. Carefully. Strategically. And people are furious. This isn't just about a policy. This is about trust. This is about dignity. This is about survival. Let me explain exactly what is happening. In the UK right now, if you start a new job, you normally have to wait up to 2 years before you gain strong protection against being unfairly fired. That means your boss can dismiss you in those first 2 years without giving you a strong reason. You could be doing everything right. You could be giving your best. You could be loyal, hardworking, and respectful. And you can still be gone the next morning. No warning, no explanation, no protection. That is the reality millions of people live with every single day. And that is why the idea of day one rights was so powerful. It meant that from your very first day at work, you could no longer be treated as a disposable object. You could no longer be used and thrown away. It meant that employers would finally have to think twice before mistreating staff. It meant workers would finally be able to breathe. For a moment, there was hope. People started to believe their lives might become more stable. That they wouldn't live in fear anymore, that they could plan their future. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. Big business groups, major corporations, and powerful investors started to panic. They didn't see worker protection. They saw loss of control. They started pressuring the government in private meetings, through emails, through phone calls, through private discussions. They claimed that day one rights would make hiring new workers too risky, that companies would stop recruiting, that the economy would suffer. But what they were really afraid of was simple. They were afraid of losing their power. Because when a worker has rights, an employer loses control. And instead of standing with the people who elected them, the government started listening to the people with money. Slowly, quietly, without any big announcement, the plan changed. The day one rights protection was pushed back. 6 months. Possibly more. The door that was supposed to open on day one was slammed shut again. And most people didn't even notice at first. Until the reports started to come out, until journalists began to question it, until unions started speaking up. And that's when people realized what had happened. They weren't just disappointed. They were betrayed. Imagine being a worker who just left a toxic job because you believed the new law was coming. Imagine starting a new job thinking, now I am protected, and then finding out you're still just as vulnerable as before. That's the reality right now, and that's why anger is growing. Across social media, people began sharing their stories. One woman said she was fired after 2 weeks because a manager didn't like her attitude. A young man said he was dismissed for asking for safer working conditions. Another worker said he was replaced simply because someone cheaper was available. And the most painful part is, all of it was legal, all of it was allowed, and all of it was supposed to end. But now it won't, at least not for a long time. This was supposed to be the government showing it cared about ordinary people, about families, about single parents, about young workers. They thought the promise was real. They believed this time, the system would actually protect them. But the moment the law was rewritten, all that hope came crashing down. Within hours of the U-turn, the backlash was fierce and loud. Trade unions sounded the alarm. Workers across the UK, from shops to warehouses, hospitals to offices, started asking the same question. Who are you working for now? One union leader slammed the government's decision as a total betrayal of working people. Another said it was a move that signaled exactly who the government really cared about. Not the workers, but the business owners and boardrooms. Ordinary employees began sharing stories. Stories of jobs lost, careers derailed, and futures made uncertain. All because the safety they believed in was stripped away before they even got settled. People who had just started work, hopeful, ready to build a better life, suddenly felt exposed again. Because the protection they were promised on day one was now delayed to 6 months. Many employers reacted with relief. For them, the labor market just got easier again. No immediate protection, no risk. A raw chance to hire and fire on their terms. Behind closed doors, powerful voices had pushed. Big companies, industry lobbyists, business associations all warned. Day one rights will kill hiring, undermine flexibility, hurt profits. Their pressure was heard loud and clear. And so, what was billed as a major win for workers became yet another compromise, a dilution, a change, not for the people but for the powerful. In Parliament, things got ugly. Some MPs from the government benches were visibly uneasy. They had backed the original bill under the pledge to protect workers. Now they were being asked to defend its dismantling. Opposition MPs pounced. Why promise protection from day one, then quietly take it away? One demanded. Was the manifesto just empty words to win votes? Asked another. The tension was real. The trust crumbling. For many voters, it wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about fairness, about dignity, about whether hard work means anything when nothing protects you from being thrown out on a whim. And then the anger turned into action. Demonstrations were organized, protests outside workplaces, social media campaigns sharing stories of injustice and betrayal. Workers began saying, "We believed. We trusted. You failed us." That anger wasn't just emotional. It was political. Because the fallout doesn't stay inside break rooms and lunch halls. It hits elections. It hits loyalty. It hits the balance of power. Large portions of the working class, support that many assumed as a base, started questioning their allegiance. Some said they might never vote the same way again. Some said they'd support any party that promised genuine protection, not empty words. The wave of discontent swept across unions, communities, and neighborhoods. Old loyalties felt broken. Faith in the system felt tested. And most dangerously for the government, people stopped believing that politicians have their best interests at heart. That feeling of betrayal is harder to reverse than any law. Because trust isn't rebuilt with statements. It's rebuilt with action. As of now, those promises remain broken. For many workers, every new shift, every new job feels like a gamble again. No safety, no security, just uncertainty. And when people start fearing their own jobs, they start fighting back. So what happens next? Will unions escalate pressure? Will there be walkouts, strikes, or legal challenges? Will working-class communities unite to demand real change? Or will this become another forgotten headline, replaced by the next crisis, the next scandal, the next empty promise? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear. For millions of workers across the UK, the promise of dignity, stability, and fairness has turned into a harsh reminder of who really holds power. And for the government, the backlash is only just beginning. The backlash was immediate, and it hit harder than anyone saw coming. Within hours of the government's U-turn on day one dismissal protection, responses started pouring in from trade unions, MPs, workers across industries. Unions called it a betrayal. One union leader said that workers were given hope, only to have it taken away quietly. Others described the revised law as a shell of its former self. Workers didn't stay silent. Across social media and WhatsApp groups, stories began to surface. People dismissed after a few weeks. Apprentices who lost jobs without reason. Part-timers who were let go before their probation. All under the same company's business decisions. Many said they had accepted difficult conditions, long hours, low pay, because they believed the promise of protection now existed. Now that belief was gone. Mothers, students, immigrant workers, part-time staff, the people who often depend on job flexibility, felt the blow hardest. For them, this wasn't political drama. It was personal. For them, every new job once again meant stepping into uncertainty. Inside Parliament, tension erupted. Some MPs from the ruling party, the very people who supported the original law, called the reversal a betrayal of trust. One backbencher bluntly asked, "If you can't stand by your own word, why should working people trust any promise at all?" Heavy backlash came from former ministers. Two people, who once helped craft the bill, now spoke out publicly, accusing their own government of selling working class support for business interests. Unions reacted sharply. One major union described the watered-down protection as unacceptable. It sends a clear message, and the working class comes second. Another warned that this move would shatter confidence in any future promises. But it wasn't only unions and MPs who reacted. Ordinary people, the workers, the employees, the everyday people, began to mobilize. Discussions started on forums, WhatsApp groups, YouTube comment sections, calls for solidarity, for support, for protest. Many asked, if day one protection can be removed so easily, What guarantee do we have for anything? Protest organizers began discussing pickets, walkouts, public demonstrations. Trade unions hinted at coordinated action if the law remained diluted. The anger that began as disappointment started growing into something deeper: resentment. Resentment over broken promises, over inequality, over being treated like disposable labor. For many, this was no longer about one law. It was about the system. A system where corporations and big business lobby harder than workers' rights. A system where words on paper feel empty when real lives are at stake. And as the public anger grew, the political consequences began mounting. Labor's credibility, once taken for granted by many, started cracking. Voters who had believed in stability, in fairness, in change, began questioning whether politicians truly represented them. In many working-class communities, conversations shifted from support to doubt. Doubt about promises. Doubt about politicians. Doubt about whether things could ever change. If this anger turns into action, if workers organize, if protests happen, if unions stay united, this scandal could become a defining moment for UK labor politics. But a government under pressure can respond in many ways. It can apologize. It can offer concessions. Or it can dig in and make people wait. For now, workers say they will not forget. They will be watching. And they will remember. The anger didn't slow down. In fact, it began to grow louder. Across the UK, the reaction to the government's quiet retreat from day one worker protection was spreading like wildfire. It wasn't happening in official speeches or press conferences. It was happening in everyday places, factories, offices, staff rooms, living rooms, buses, cafes, and online spaces where the working class speaks freely. People were sharing personal stories in huge numbers. A warehouse worker in Manchester explained how he was dismissed after only 3 weeks on the job. No written warning, no explanation. Just a short message from HR saying, "Your services are no longer required." He said he had left a stable job for this new opportunity because he believed the government's promise that workers would finally be protected from unfair dismissal from day one. A single mother working in retail in Birmingham said almost the same thing. She had taken on more shifts, arranged childcare, paid transport, only to be let go before her probation even ended. The new rule would have given her a basic safety net, but that safety net never arrived. This was no longer about political debate. This was about broken lives, broken trust, and broken promises. On TikTok, people began posting short videos describing how easily employers could now get away with firing without cause. On X, thousands of posts carried the same message. We were lied to. Some videos gained millions of views overnight. The working class was finally visible, and the story could no longer be hidden. Under pressure, government spokespersons attempted damage control. They claimed the amendment was necessary to avoid burdening businesses. They spoke of keeping the UK competitive and protecting employers from legal risk. But for workers, that explanation felt insulting. Competitive for who? Protected from what exactly? And who was protecting the employees? In reality, the revision made one thing clear. When forced to choose, the government chose corporate comfort over worker safety. And people noticed. Inside Labour itself, tension was growing fast. Younger MPs, many from working class backgrounds, felt betrayed by the direction the party was taking. In private messages and leaked conversations, MPs expressed concerns that the party was slowly losing touch with the very people who brought it into power. One MP reportedly said, "We didn't campaign for this. This is not the change we promised on doorsteps." For the first time in a long while, the word split began to reappear in political commentary. Not just division between parties, but division within Labour itself. At the same time, rival groups began taking advantage. Reform UK saw an opportunity. They started highlighting the government's broken promise, pushing simple messaging. They don't care about you, we will. While Labour lost trust, others were ready to fill the gap. But the most dangerous element for the government was not the opposition. It was apathy. When people stop believing in politicians, they stop voting. They stop participating in democracy, and that creates a dangerous vacuum. Political analysts warned that this situation could lead to rising public disengagement, mass dissatisfaction, even unrest in the future if economic struggles increased. Remember, the UK was already under pressure. Cost of living, housing crisis, NHS strain, job insecurity, wage stagnation. And now, on top of it all, trust had cracked again. The Day One rights promise was supposed to be a sign of new hope, something small but powerful, a symbol that workers mattered, a turning point. Instead, it became another reminder that power often speaks, but doesn't always act. Even some business owners quietly admitted that the law could have worked if implemented properly. A clear process, fair guidelines, transparent review systems. None of those were impossible. But the government didn't even try to fix it. They simply stepped away. Meanwhile, unions were planning their next move. Some discussed nationwide demonstrations. Others looked into legal challenges. A few even suggested strategic walkouts. Silent signals to show the power workers truly hold, because one undeniable truth remains. Without workers, nothing moves. No trains, no shops, no deliveries, no offices, no hospitals. The entire country runs on ordinary people, and ordinary people were running out of patience. This wasn't just about dismissal protection anymore. It had grown into a symbol of something much deeper. Broken trust, inequality, class divide, political dishonesty, and rising frustration. And the worst part for the government? They had done this to themselves. In a moment where unity was needed, they created division. In a moment that required bravery, they chose comfort. In a moment that demanded leadership, they chose silence. But silence never lasts, because the next phase is coming. Louder voices, bigger protests, brutal questions in Parliament, and a public that is no longer willing to accept quiet excuses. In the next part, we are going to explore what comes next for the government, what pressure could force a reversal again, and whether the UK is heading towards a political turning point that no one can stop. And trust me, this part is the most explosive yet. By now, the situation had gone far beyond a simple policy mistake. This wasn't just a reversed amendment or a technical adjustment buried in a long legal document. This was something much more damaging, a collapse in credibility. And for any government, credibility is everything. Once it breaks, it is almost impossible to rebuild. After days of online outrage, worker testimonies, political tension, and growing media attention, the government attempted a second round of damage control. This time they sent out senior officials to speak on record, on television, on radio, in carefully managed interviews. But the more they spoke, the worse it seemed to get. Instead of admitting the decision had hurt working people, they repeated generic phrases. Support for workers remains a top priority. We are ensuring a balance between employee rights and economic growth. These decisions are complex. Complex. That single word angered people even more, because nothing about this was complex to the average person. You either protect someone from being fired unfairly on day one, or you don't. There was no complicated math, no hidden science, only a simple choice. And the choice had already been made. On discussion panels, commentators began pointing out a harsh reality. This decision didn't come from confusion. It came from influence. Powerful business lobbying groups had raised concerns behind closed doors. Large corporations had warned that day one protection could make it harder to manage staff efficiently. Legal teams had pushed back, explaining how it might increase unfair dismissal claims. Instead of designing a smarter, fairer version of the policy, the easiest route was taken: remove it, and every ordinary worker was expected to simply accept it. But this generation of workers is different. They are informed, they are connected, they are vocal, and they are watching closely. Some journalists started digging deeper. They revisited older political promises, old speeches, campaign statements, party leaflets. They compared what was said to what was done. The contrast was undeniable. Clips began reappearing of politicians, standing in front of factory workers, saying things like, "Your rights matter from day one. No one should be afraid of unfair dismissal." Those clips now played online next to headlines revealing the amended law. The result? Explosive backlash, not orchestrated by activists, not organized by opposition parties, but led by ordinary citizens who felt embarrassed, fooled, and disrespected. At the same time, the economic impact of weak job protections began to show up in real numbers. Companies quietly started rotating staff more aggressively. Temporary contracts increased. Trial periods were used more strategically. Some employers realized they could simply let people go within the early stages and replace them without consequences. This created an unstable job environment. People became scared to speak up at work, scared to report problems, scared to challenge unfair treatment. Fear began to spread through workplaces, and when workers are afraid, the whole country becomes weaker. Productivity drops, mental health declines, families struggle, stress levels rise, consumer confidence falls. A government decision made in a calm office was now having emotional, financial, and psychological consequences in millions of homes. That is the real cost of political cowardice. In Parliament, the mood had shifted. Where there had once been confidence, there was now discomfort. Even loyal supporters were finding it harder to defend the decision. Every time the issue was raised, answers became shorter, more controlled, more scripted. Some MPs avoided the topic entirely. Others grew visibly frustrated. One thing was clear: this wasn't going away. This was becoming one of those defining moments in modern British politics, the kind that people remember for years as the moment they stopped believing. And when belief disappears, change becomes unstoppable. Behind the scenes, policy experts and legal analysts began outlining what could happen next. They said if pressure continued, the government would be left with three possible paths: continue ignoring the outrage and hope it fades, offer a weaker substitute policy, fully restore the original protection law. Each path comes with risks, but only one path has a chance of saving public trust. Meanwhile, unions and worker organizations were not waiting. They were already drafting proposals, planning lobbying campaigns, organizing conversations with sympathetic MPs, preparing for wider national action if nothing changed. This was turning into a coordinated movement, not just a trending topic. And the most powerful part? It wasn't being led by politicians. It was being led by the people. Teachers, drivers, nurses, builders, warehouse, workers, students, shop employees, office staff, freelancers, the very people society depends on, the ones who keep the country alive. And now they were beginning to realize something important. Their voices, when combined, were stronger than any government statement. The question now was no longer, did the government make a mistake? The question had changed to, will the government be brave enough to fix it? Because the longer they wait, the louder the anger grows, the deeper the damage goes, and the harder the recovery becomes. In the next and final part, we'll explore what outcome is most likely, what insiders are predicting behind closed doors, and whether this scandal could lead to a full political shift in the UK's future. This is not just about workers anymore. This is about power, and who truly holds it. By this point, the government had run out of places to hide. What began as a quiet adjustment in legal wording had now transformed into something far bigger. A national conversation about truth, power, and who the political system truly serves. Inside Westminster, the mood was no longer defensive. It was fearful. MPs were receiving hundreds of emails daily from angry constituents. Workers demanded explanations. Families wanted to know why the promise of protection had vanished overnight. Students were questioning whether their future in the UK would be built on security or instability. Even those who had never followed politics before were suddenly paying attention. Because this time, it felt personal. Late-night discussions in Parliament became more intense. Private meetings were held. Party leaders were pressured by their own members. Strategy teams scrambled to contain the narrative before it completely destroyed trust in the party's future. One uncomfortable truth could no longer be ignored. If the government did not reverse course, it would not be forgiven. Political history is full of crises, some big, some small. But the ones that define leadership are the ones that test honesty. This was no longer about economics or legislation. It had become a moral issue. The working class did not want speeches. They did not want spin. They did not want excuses. They wanted respect. And respect means accountability. Behind the scenes, talk of a potential policy U-turn began to circulate again. But this time, not as a possibility, as a necessity. Advisors warned that if the government continued to ignore the issue, it might face mass union action, falling approval ratings, record low voter turnout, increase in opposition support, long-term generational distrust. In short, political suicide. Some senior figures reportedly pushed hard for a full restoration of the original Day One rights promise. Others resisted, worrying that it would make the government look weak. But here's the disturbing truth. A government that refuses to fix a mistake out of fear of looking weak is already weak. Real strength is not in stubbornness. Real strength is in correction, and the British public knows this. That's why the pressure did not stop. Online platforms exploded again, but now with a different message. We are watching. You work for us. Fix it. This wasn't anger anymore. This was a warning. And history shows us something very important. When the working class unites, governments fall. Systems change. Empires shift. The same people who build the roads, run the hospitals, stock the shelves, deliver the packages, teach the children, and keep the lights on. Those people are not powerless. They are the power. The Day One rights scandal had started as a broken line in a policy document, but it had now cracked open something much deeper. A realization. A realization that promises are only valuable when the people demand they be kept. Now, the UK stands at a crossroads. One path leads to continued distrust, growing division, and political collapse. The other leads to reform, accountability, and perhaps something rare in modern times. A reminder that the voice of the people can still shape the future. What happens next is no longer just in the hands of politicians. It's in the hands of the public, and that may be the most powerful outcome of all. Because no matter what decision comes from Westminster, one thing can never be reversed again. The people have woken up. And once people wake up, they don't go back to sleep. Please subscribe EcoStorm for further videos.